They said it vanished in a single day, an entire world swallowed by the sea, a place of breathtaking beauty, unimaginable power, and knowledge far beyond its time. But what if I told you, Atlantis might not just be a myth? What if deep beneath our oceans, or even buried under the soil of America, lies the evidence of a forgotten civilization, one that could rewrite human history forever? Before we dive into this emotional, eye-opening journey through time, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. This story will change how you see the past and, maybe, even the future. For centuries, the legend of Atlantis has captivated the minds of explorers, scientists, and dreamers. First described by the ancient philosopher Plato over 2,000 years ago, Atlantis was said to be a mighty empire that flourished beyond imagination, only to vanish beneath the waves in a single catastrophic moment. But was it ever real, or was it just a fable, created to teach lessons about power, pride, and downfall? Today, we unravel the mystery. We follow the voices of those who've dedicated their lives, their sanity, and sometimes their very safety to uncovering the truth. What you're about to hear is more than a theory. It's a journey into a past that refuses to stay buried. He was only 11 years old when it began, a stormy Saturday afternoon in Charleston, South Carolina. Rain beat against the windows as young Daniel Masters curled up on the couch, flipping through channels, restless and bored. And then, he saw it, a documentary, grainy footage, ancient stones beneath turquoise water. The narrator spoke of a lost city, Atlantis. Daniel leaned in, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know why, but something inside him shifted that day. Something ancient, something personal. Most kids outgrow their fascinations. Dinosaurs, outer space, mythical lands. But Daniel's fascination didn't fade. It grew into obsession. By high school, while his friends played football or went to parties, Daniel was buried in books, Plato's dialogues, oceanic topography, seismic maps, legends whispered across cultures. He believed not with blind faith, but with fierce curiosity that there was truth in what the world had dismissed. His professors at university often rolled their eyes. Atlantis is a story, they said. Don't waste your career chasing ghosts. But Daniel didn't care. He wasn't chasing ghosts. He was chasing a feeling, a sense that something magnificent had once existed, and had been unfairly erased. He graduated with honors in marine archaeology, but he wasn't content with research papers and lectures. He wanted to dive, to feel the ocean's pulse, to listen not just with instruments, but with intuition. In 2007, he finally got his chance. He joined a small research team studying submerged structures off the coast of the Bahamas. The location, Bimini Road. From above, it looked ordinary, but underwater, it was anything but. Massive, flat stones, nearly identical in shape and size, laid out in a near-perfect line. Some were rectangular, others square, but together, they stretched out like a path, or a roadway. Each time Daniel descended into those waters, he felt something deeper than science. He felt presence. He would hover over the formations, hands trembling not from cold, but from awe. What kind of natural formation lines up in right angles? What force laid them down with such precision? And why, even surrounded by the hum of diving equipment and the rhythm of his own breath, did he feel like he wasn't alone? In his fifth dive at Bimini, he brought down specialized sensors to measure the magnetic field. What he recorded shocked him. Sudden shifts, strange surges, a pulse inexplicable and rhythmic, like a heartbeat, coming from deep below the stones. His colleagues dismissed it. Anomalies, they called them, but Daniel wasn't so sure. To him, it felt like the earth was whispering something long forgotten, calling him, welcoming him, warning him. That night, alone in his tent on the beach, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stared at the stars above, and whispered into the dark, "Where did you go?" He didn't know who he was speaking to, but in his heart, he believed Atlantis was listening. It started with a storm, and a story. The kind of storm that shakes the windows and hushes the world. Daniel Masters, just 11 years old, sat alone in his family's living room in Savannah, Georgia, flipping through television channels, waiting for the rain to stop. And then, the screen flickered. A documentary, old, faded, mysterious. A voice spoke of a lost city, swallowed by the ocean. Atlantis. They called it a myth, a legend. But for Daniel, something shifted. It wasn't the visuals, it wasn't the voice. It was a feeling deep in his chest, sudden and strange. A sense of recognition, as if some forgotten part of him had just remembered something ancient. From that moment on, he wasn't just curious, he was consumed. As Daniel grew, so did the fire inside him. He tore through every book on ancient civilizations, geology, archaeology, and oceanic mystery he could find. While other kids were outside playing ball or watching cartoons, Daniel was tracing satellite maps, printing photos of sunken ruins, and reading Plato's dialogues like they were scripture. In high school, he debated teachers who told him Atlantis was fiction. In college, professors warned him, "Don't waste your talent on stories." But Daniel didn't see stories. He saw clues, whispers, patterns. He graduated with honors in marine archaeology, determined not just to study the past, but to feel it. Not just to interpret history, but to touch it with his own hands. Beneath the Waves, 2007, the Bahamas. His first real expedition. He joined a small research team exploring the infamous Bimini Rodan underwater formation just off the western coast of Bimini Island. From the boat, it looked like nothing. But the moment Daniel descended into the water, everything changed. They're laid out like a path through time, were massive stone blocks, some as large as cars, perfectly shaped, almost intentional, rectangular, symmetrical, stacked side by side, like an ancient causeway that once led somewhere. And in that moment, something inside him broke open, not in fear, not in confusion, but in awe, as if his soul had been waiting for this exact moment. The silence under the sea wasn't empty, it was sacred. He hovered over the stones, his heart racing, bubbles rising slowly toward the light above, and he felt it again. That strange, impossible emotion, like he had been there before. But then came something even stranger. Daniel returned the next day with magnetic field sensors, just basic tools to check for anomalies. But what he recorded defied everything he had been taught. Spikes, surges, waves of magnetic energy pulsing from beneath the seabed, not constant, not random, rhythmic, alive. It was as if the earth itself was speaking, as if something buried deep below was still awake, still waiting. When he shared the data, the other researchers shrugged. Coincidence? They said. Just interference. Nothing serious. But Daniel knew better. He felt better. That night, lying under the stars on the sand, listening to the waves roll in, he whispered into the dark. If you're still out there, I'll find you. His hands were shaken not from the cold, but from something deeper, a connection, a calling, a truth waiting to be uncovered. From that moment on, Daniel Masters stopped searching for proof. He started searching for remembrance, not just of a lost city, but of a lost truth that lived somewhere in the water. And somewhere, inside himself. It had been nearly 2 years since Daniel's dive at Bimini. His reputation was growing, but not in the way he hoped. To the academic world, he was now the Atlantis guy, a dreamer, a romantic, someone chasing fairy tales in a world that demanded facts. He tried to ignore the whispers, but doubt has a voice of its own, and it began to speak to him quietly, relentlessly. What if they were right? What if it was just a story? Then, in the fall of 2009, everything changed. One morning, he received a letter. No return address, no name, just weathered paper, and one line of text. Follow the fault line. The truth is older than you know. Beneath the message coordinates, he entered them into his laptop and stared at the result in disbelief. New Mexico, nowhere near water, nowhere near Atlantis. It made no sense. But something inside him stirred again, that same feeling from Bimini, that quiet pull in the chest. The one that doesn't ask for logic, the one that asks for faith. So he packed a bag and followed the map. The desert greeted him like a dream he remembered. The air was dry, still ancient. He arrived near the town of Chaco Canyon, where he was introduced to a group of indigenous researchers preserving sacred sites and oral traditions. They welcomed him, but cautiously. They'd seen outsiders come before, chasing stories, stealing artifacts, leaving only dust behind. But Daniel wasn't there to take. He was there to listen. For days, he sat in silence listening to songs, stories, and legends passed down through generations. Tales of a great city that fell into the earth, of a people who burned too bright and whose power turned against the sky, of structures with glowing centers, and a sky that once turned red with sorrow. Daniel sat frozen. It wasn't just familiar. It was Plato. The circles of land and water, the energy source at the center, the sudden fall. All mirrored in these stories, told thousands of miles from Greece. But the most profound moment came one night, as he shared a quiet meal with one of the elders' grandmother Leah, a woman with lines on her face that looked like the canyon walls themselves. She watched him carefully, gently, as if she saw straight through him, and then she said, with tears glistening in her eyes, Atlantis was never a place, it was a time when we remembered who we were, a time when the earth and sky spoke the same language, and we forgot. Daniel's throat tightened. He had no words. He felt the truth of it not in his mind, but in his bones. The next day they took him into a hidden canyon, a place few outsiders had seen. There, carved into red stone, were symbols unlike anything he'd encountered before. Spirals, circles within circles, lines forming perfect angles, and at the center of one massive petroglyph, a shape eerily similar to what Plato had described, 3 concentric rings, 2 of land, 1 of water. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He reached out and touched the stone, fingertips brushing over centuries of dust and silence. It was like shaking hands with time itself. And once again, the feeling returned, that impossible feeling, like something buried inside him had just woken up. That night, as wind swept across the desert, Daniel stood alone and whispered to the stars. If Atlantis lived here, how far did it reach? How much have we forgotten? No answer came, only silence. But to Daniel, it wasn't empty, it was sacred, like the pause between heartbeats, like the space before memory returns. For a moment, Daniel felt invincible. The symbols, the stories, the magnetic readings, it was all coming together. Scattered puzzle pieces finally forming a picture. To him, It was no longer a theory. It was a truth. One the world had buried, either by accident or by design. So he returned to where it had all started, the academic world. With photographs of the petroglyphs, translated oral accounts, and readings from both sea and land, he stood before scholars, scientists, and skeptics. And he told them everything. He spoke with fire in his voice, but softness in his heart. He wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. He was trying to bring something sacred into the light. But when he finished, there was no applause, just silence, and then laughter. Atlantis in New Mexico. Emotional speculation. There's no peer-reviewed evidence. He's chasing ghosts. They called it pseudoscience. They called him unstable. A man who had let obsession replace reason. Daniel tried to explain. Tried to defend the symbols, the magnetic pulses, the indigenous stories, but they didn't hear him. They had already decided. In a matter of weeks, he was dropped from 2 major research projects. Grants pulled, lectures canceled, emails left unanswered, and the damage didn't stop at his career. His marriage, once built on shared dreams and quiet support, began to crack under the weight of it all. His wife tried to understand, at first, but late nights buried in maps. Days spent chasing coordinates. The growing wall of silence between them. One night, after weeks of barely speaking, she whispered, "I don't know who you're trying to prove this to, Daniel, me, or yourself." And then she was gone. Her suitcase by the door, the house suddenly, too quiet. Friends faded too, not all at once, but gradually. Calls stopped. Invitations disappeared. People he once trusted now avoided eye contact. They loved the old Daniel the dreamer, but not this version, the believer. And yet, he didn't stop. With every door closed, Daniel opened another inside himself. He sold his car, moved into a small creaking RV parked near the Colorado border. No salary, no university badge, no team, just his research, his notebooks, his voice recorders, and a heart that still whispered, "You're close." At night, he would sit beneath the stars, his only company, the wind and the weight of memory. He would replay tribal recordings, reread Plato's words, stare at the maps he could nearly draw by heart. And sometimes, he would cry, not just from grief, but from that strange, aching belief that the world had chosen to forget something it should have remembered, and that he, just one man, was trying to hold it together. And this is where viewers began to feel it. Because this wasn't about Atlantis anymore. This was about faith. About what we give up in search of what we love. About how it feels to stand alone. In a world that won't believe you, and still keep going. In one of his recordings, never shared publicly, Daniel said, "They think I'm lost, but I've never been clearer. I didn't lose my way. I just chose a path no one else was willing to walk." He was no longer trying to convince the world. He was listening to something deeper. Something that didn't speak in facts or evidence, but in instinct. In dreams. In the spaces between reality and memory. Because sometimes the greatest discoveries aren't made in labs or headlines. They're made in isolation. When the world walks away, and you keep walking forward. By 2019, Daniel Masters had stopped expecting answers. He wasn't chasing Atlantis for fame anymore. There was no one left to impress, no podium, no applause, just him. And the quiet pull of a truth he could no longer deny. He'd grown lean, weathered, his hands calloused from digging through dry earth and ancient maps. His eyes, tired but clear. They were the eyes of a man who had sacrificed everything for a question. And then, one cold morning in February, the question answered back. A friend, one of the last few who still believed in him, sent Daniel a secure email. Attached high-resolution satellite images. The source, a foreign mapping satellite. The location, the Gulf of Mexico. Daniel opened the files and stared in silence. There, beneath hundreds of feet of water, was a structure, not a blur, not a shadow, a geometric shape perfectly symmetrical, circular, massive, with lines and patterns too precise to be natural. It spanned nearly 5 miles across with concentric rings, separated by clear gaps, exactly like Plato's description of Atlantis. He zoomed in again and again, his breath shallow, his heart pounding like a drum inside his chest. "No," he whispered, "this can't be coincidence." Within days, something strange happened. The area on public mapping sites was blurred out. The next time he tried to access the satellite data, the files were gone. Even archived links had been scrubbed, like it had never been there at all. He reached out to his contact, no reply, just silence. The next week, Daniel drove to the Texas coast, to a spot directly east of the anomaly, and what he saw there only deepened the mystery. Navy ships, unmarked helicopters, and silence. Always silence. He watched for hours from a cliffside with binoculars and an old parabolic mic, and then, at dusk, he heard it. A sound, low, constant, a deep frequency hum so low it vibrated in his chest. It wasn't the ocean. It wasn't the wind. It was something else, something mechanical, something alive. He stayed for 3 days, recording ship patterns, tracking movements, marking when the hum intensified. Each night, he slept in his car. Each morning, the same feeling returned, the same question. Why was the military here? If there was nothing to hide, he reached out to a few trusted researchers, ones who believed in him, quietly. But none of them would speak publicly. One simply wrote back, "Daniel, you're close. Be careful. This isn't just archaeology anymore." That sentence sat with him. Nor did him, because deep down, Daniel had already started to feel it too. This wasn't just about ruins. Not just about proving Plato right. This was about power, control, knowledge kept from the public. Something was being covered up, and someone wanted it kept buried. Daniel never claimed the structure was Atlantis, not directly. He was too careful for that. But in his journal he wrote something chilling. There is something below, and whatever it is, someone already knows it's there. For the first time in his journey, Daniel wasn't just filled with wonder, he was filled with fear. Not because he doubted himself, but because he realized he was no longer alone in this search, and the others. They weren't searching. They were protecting Mython. This marked a turning point in Daniel's quest. He wasn't chasing shadows anymore. He was chasing footprints, and now he had to decide. Keep going deeper, or walk away before he vanished like the city he sought. Weeks had passed since Daniel last stood on the Texas shoreline, listening to the hum rising from the deep. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The silence, the secrecy, the undeniable shape under the sea. But something else was beginning to haunt him too. Not a sound, not a sight, a feeling. One he couldn't explain, but couldn't escape. Then, one morning, while sorting through his mail Mosley bills, flyers, and rejection letters, he saw an envelope. Plain, handwritten, no return address. He opened it slowly. Inside, a letter written in blue ink, childlike but careful, and tucked within it, a drawing. It was made with colored pencils on crinkled paper. 3 circles. 2 of land, 1 of water. Bridges between them, a glowing shape in the center, like a crystal or a tower around the edges. Tiny waves, stars above, and what looked like energy flowing outward. At the bottom, it was signed, "My grandpa's dream." He said he saw it before he died. Samantha, age 10, Daniel sat still for a long time. His hands trembled not from shock, but from something deeper, recognition. Because what this little girl had drawn matched Plato's Atlantis almost perfectly. From memory, from a dream, from something she was never taught. He turned over the letter and read her message. "He used to tell me about a place with water that glowed at night. He said he lived there once, not in this life, but before. Everyone thought he was just being silly, but I believed him. When I saw your name on a video, I wanted to send this to you. Maybe you'll believe him too." Daniel sat in silence. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away, because this wasn't sadness, it was knowing. That night, he stared at the drawing for hours. He thought about the places he'd been, the people he'd met, the voices of elders in New Mexico, the tremor of stone beneath the sea, the soft hum no one else could hear. And now this, a child, a grandfather's dream, a memory passed not through blood, but through something else. He began researching what some scientists call genetic memory, the idea that knowledge, trauma, or imagery can be passed from one generation to another through more than just storytelling, through biology, energy, spirit. Daniel began asking questions he never dared ask out loud. What if Atlantis isn't just a place we were trying to find? What if it's something trying to remember itself through us? He started getting more messages. People from across the U.S., from Florida to Arizona to Ohio, all sharing similar stories. "I've dreamed of this place since I was a child. I saw a city of light in the water. I thought I made it up. There was music, but no instruments, just light." Daniel marked them on a map. Not as evidence, but as echoes. Something was resonating not in stone or soil, but in the human soul. One evening, he recorded a voice note he never published. "We're not just searching for Atlantis, it's searching for us. Not in oceans, but in dreams, in the spaces between childhood and memory, where wonder still lives." And in that quiet realization, Daniel's mission transformed again. He no longer believed Atlantis was only physical. He believed it was spiritual, collective, ancient. Not a city lost in water, but a state of consciousness, lost in time. And maybe, just maybe, we didn't need sonar to find it. Maybe all we ever needed was to remember. October 14th, 2021. Cloudy skies, cold waters, no cameras, no research team, just Daniel and the sea. He had chosen the spot carefully, off the coast of Georgia, where a recent underwater tremor had created a new trench. Seismologists logged it as minor, but Daniel, he believed it was something more, something waiting to be uncovered. He suited up alone, strapped his recorder to his chest, wrote a single line in his notebook before stepping onto the boat. "If I come back, it means I've seen enough." The water was colder than expected, and darker as he descended. The light vanished faster than usual, just blackness, and the soft crackle of his oxygen. At 300 feet, the trench came into view. A jagged scar in the seafloor, freshly torn open by the earth itself, and then out of the shadow. Stone, not rock, not coral. Stone, cut, carved, shaped. His heart hammered in his chest as he moved closer. Columns tall worn, and ancient leaning slightly, but still upright. Pillars arranged in a circular pattern, just like the drawing Samantha had sent, and there, carved into the base of one, a symbol, a spiral, enclosed in 3 rings. Just like Plato said, just like the petroglyphs in New Mexico, just like the drawings from dreams. Daniel reached out and touched it, and in that moment, he wept. Not from fear, not from joy, but from knowing. Then something shifted. The seafloor trembled beneath him, a deep, muted rumble like the earth holding its breath. To his left, sand exploded upward. A cloud of debris filled the water as the trench widened, and there, for the briefest moment, a doorway, half-buried, massive, angled, ancient, and unmistakably man-made. But before he could move toward it, the trench shook again. Violent, sudden. A crack tore through the stone beside him. Dust and debris clouded everything. Visibility dropped to 0. Daniel turned, heart pounding, and began to ascend. Slowly, carefully, his hands trembling as he clutched the line, eyes never leaving the place he'd just seen. He surfaced minutes later, gasping not just for air, but for understanding. He collapsed on the deck of his boat, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. Release for hours. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stared at the horizon, and then, quietly, to no one but the wind, he whispered, "I found it. I know it's real. I don't need anyone to believe me now, because I believe it. With everything I have left." Daniel never dove again. Not because he was afraid, but because he didn't have to. That moment, that glimpse, was enough. Enough to validate a lifetime of sacrifice, enough to carry the truth without proof. Enough to finally let go. He returned home, a quieter man. Still haunted, but no longer lost. He stopped seeking validation. Stopped responding to critics. He spoke less. But when he did, he smiled more. Because he knew something now something only those who via touched the unknown ever really understand. That truth isn't always for everyone. Sometimes, it's just for the one who never stopped searching. Daniel Masters never returned to the ocean. He sold his diving gear, donated most of his research, and quietly moved to a cabin in the forests of Oregon, near the mountains and far from noise. He didn't vanish, he just stepped back. From the debates, from the arguments, from the spotlight he never wanted in the first place. But the world didn't forget him. Letters still came dozens every year. Packages from people he had never met. Children's drawings of glowing cities beneath the sea. Handwritten dreams of waves and spiral towers. Stories that echoed the same rhythm, the same place. Even though none of these people knew each other, he kept them all, stacked in boxes, lined across his walls. Because even in silence, the story was still speaking. In his final interview before disappearing from public life, Daniel said something that struck deeply. Atlantis was never just about stone or ruins. It was a reflection, a memory of who we were, and maybe who we still are. He had started the journey hoping to discover a city, but what he truly uncovered was a warning. One left behind not just by Plato, but perhaps by the people of Atlantis themselves. They were powerful, brilliant, advanced beyond their time. But they forgot something. They let pride outrun wisdom, technology outrun humility. They believed they were untouchable, and the ocean reminded them they weren't. That was Plato's true message, wasn't it? Not that a city sank, but that humanity has sunk before, and it can sink again. If we forget balance, if we chase power over peace, if we build up without looking in, maybe Atlantis wasn't lost. Maybe it gave itself up as a story, so that one day, someone would listen and remember. Daniel still walks the forests sometimes. Quiet steps on moss-covered trails. He listens to birds now, instead of sonar, to wind, instead of waves. But deep in his heart, he still feels the city, not as a ruin, but as a whisper. We were here, and we still are. In your memories, in your warnings, in your dreams. So now, I leave the question with you. After everything you've seen, the drawings, the ruins, the whispers of a lost time echoing through dreams and oceans, do you believe, not in fairy tales, not in fantasy, but in the possibility, that somewhere in our past, there was a civilization so advanced, so enlightened that the only thing more powerful than its rise was the tragedy of its fall? This isn't just about Atlantis, it's about us. About the parts of history we've buried, the stories we call myths, because they're too painful to accept as truth. But some stories aren't myths at all, they're memories. Faded, fragmented, still beating in the quiet corners of our collective soul. Maybe Atlantis wasn't just a city that drowned, maybe it was a lesson we were never supposed to forget. A lesson about balance, about humility, about what happens when power becomes louder than wisdom, and maybe, just maybe, we're standing at that edge again right now. So tell me, what do you believe? Was Atlantis a myth, a metaphor, or a truth waiting to rise again? Leave a comment below. I want to hear your story, your dreams, your version of Atlantis. And if this journey touched something in you, if it made you question, feel, or remember, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who still believes the world holds more secrets than answers. Because this isn't the end. There are still stories to tell, still truths to uncover, still mysteries buried in time, and waiting for someone to listen.